Welcome everyone to this event, which is brought to you in collaboration with the Royal Institute of Planners and the International Society of City and Regional Planners. It's a pleasure to have you all join this webinar. My name is Beatrice Crabb. I'm a chartered planner and international manager at the Royal Town Planning Institute. For those who are not familiar with us, the Institute is an international body for planners with over 27,000 members worldwide. As an institute, we exist to champion planning, working for the long-term common good and well-being of current and future generations. And our purpose is to empower planners to deliver a positive impact. And one of our priorities is to equip our members to address the climate and nature emergencies. We passionately feel that planners, together with other built environment professionals, can and must play a vital role in addressing this global challenge, lead on climate action, and help build a more sustainable and resilient world for our communities. We're therefore delighted to continue this collaboration with ISOCARP on climate action, focusing on the intersection between planning and climate resilience. This is our fifth event together, and this series is part of the Initiative for Climate Resilience Planning. For the first event of this year, we wanted to take a look at the climate agenda in this changing and volatile global context and look forward to the challenges and the opportunities ahead. We also wanted to take a look at the IPCC special report on climate change and cities and its relevance to planners and built environment professionals. During this session, we will also have a close focus on implementation and local action with practical examples on how planners can play their part in supporting climate resilient cities and communities. Today we have a fantastic panel bringing a variety of experience and context, and I very much look forward to a stimulating conversation. Without much further ado, I will hand you over to my colleague Lisa, who will say a few words about on behalf of ISOCARP and introduce more fully the session. Thank you very much. Over to you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Beatrice. We really enjoy, organizing these webinars, and this partnership has really been very successful and interesting. So I welcome you all to the 16th ISOCARP Cyber Agora partnership between the International Society of Regional Planners and RTPI. My name is Lisa Nyamadzao, and I am a member of ISOCARP and also part of the ISOCARP Initiative for Climate Resilience Planning. I will be your moderator today, but before we begin, I will just give a few house rules and then introduce ISOCARP. So to begin, please note that this meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be shared widely on YouTube and throughout our membership. So be mindful of that in case you do not want to be recorded. And secondly, we want this to be an interactive session, so you can use the chat box to post your questions, to introduce yourself and tell us where you're joining us from. Would love to hear that. And thank you also for making time to be with us. So for those who are not yet familiar with ISOCARP, we are a global organization, a global network of urban and regional planning professionals and other professions, founded more than 60 years ago, and is dedicated to promoting excellence in planning. And we do that through knowledge exchange, through collaborations and global dialogue. So it's both, we do have both individual and institutional members from across the globe. And one of the ways that we do this exchange and collaboration is through initiatives such as this one, the Cyber Agoras and webinars, which creates that platform for planners and researchers to exchange ideas around different topics. And really, today's topic comes at a very important time when climate change is no longer just a distant challenge, but is an urgent reality that planners are being faced and confronted with every day. And at ISOCARP, we have been engaged in the global climate agenda. We are part of the local governments and municipal authorities constituency, also known as the LGMA, and we have been participating in the different UNFCCC climate negotiations since COP26 in Glasgow. So we are increasingly seeing the role of cities and planners in the global climate landscape and how we can translate these negotiations to the ground. So to begin, we have a very interesting lineup of speakers joining us today from different organizations and institutions that we work with, and also that work on the intersection of urban planning, of climate policy, and implementation. So to keep things smooth and to begin, I will briefly call the speakers and they can unmute themselves and further introduce themselves and share their screen or their presentation. And our first speaker for today is Ariel Dekovic from ICLEI. Ariel, please welcome to our webinar today. She will talk about COP30 and the challenge and opportunity of multi-level implementation. Ariel, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Lisa. Great to be here with you today. I just want to confirm you can see my slides okay. All good there with the slide presentation?
Yes, it's now okay.
Okay, perfect. Wonderful. Okay, hopefully my connection is okay, and it's wonderful to be with you all today. I'm quite excited myself actually to attend this and hear from our other speakers, such wonderful topics that we have, all very interlinked, I think. So hopefully we'll sort of be able to make a red thread for you here, and certainly the questions period at the end will be another time when we can make those connections for you. So I'm going to take a few minutes today just to talk a little bit about the LGMA, the work that we're doing within the UNFCCC space. As Lisa mentioned, we're very glad to have ISOCARP as an active member within the constituency. And so I just wanted to bring to you, a bit of a background for those of you who are not familiar with the constituency of what we've been working towards and have worked on up until this point, what we were able to achieve at COP, and then looking forward really to the next 3 years, kind of what are some of the priorities that we're seeing, and happy to answer questions along the way or at the end. So first of all, the LGMA, if you have not heard of it before, so it's the Local Governments and Municipal Authorities constituency. It is one of the original constituencies to the UNFCCC. So there are 9 constituencies altogether. We're one of the first 3. I think we're special also because we're the only constituency that has actual, that represents governments within what is essentially a governmental space. So I think that kind of sets us apart. In terms of what we're trying to do at the constituency is really first and foremost create a unified agenda for this huge kind of, nebulous web of governments around the world to come into the climate space. So really trying to set the agenda for subnational diplomacy so that we can really have a collective impact within the space. We are trying to do this through kind of a variety of tactics, let's say, so expert opinions coming in, proactive targeted diplomacy, deploying political leaders within these spaces, and then also trying to move the public understanding as well. So sort of combine those diplomacy aspects with more of public campaigns, and hopefully those kinds of tactics lead us to our collective goals. In a very kind of logistical or direct sense, we collaborate directly directly with the COP presidencies. So the constituencies do have that kind of privilege to get to work directly with the presidencies to try to create meaningful roles for them within the agenda, as well as connections to the parties. And then finally, as I said, kind of that connection to the greater movement, making sure that kind of the work that we're doing within the UNFCCC space aligns with this global narrative that Lisa was talking about, that the reality that you all are seeing on the ground, really trying to make this conversation connected to what can sometimes be a very opaque or complex multilateral agreement space. So that's what we're trying to do. And throughout the years, we have been able to track quite a number of wins, of advocacy achievements throughout the years that build this greater picture of how multi-level governance, how local and regional governments, subnational governments directly are referenced within the negotiated outcomes and the action agenda and some other elements of the UNFCCC processes to kind of advance the goals of our space. So particularly there have been a number of references to multi-level action in these global agreements. One of the real kind of cornerstone moment for us was in the Paris Agreement, where the preamble recognizes the importance of engaging with all levels of government. But since then, and I should add, this doesn't include this year's references as well, but COP30's references as well. There were also other references within COP26 and COP28 outcomes. In the mitigation area, we've seen really excellent inclusion of cities, buildings, urban systems into the process, sort of culminating in COP29 and the mitigation work program, focusing on this, and also as a result of that, really being referenced as one of the kind of most positive spaces within the climate negotiation space, that really negotiators had a very kind of positive experience working on that. In adaptation, we saw negotiated outcomes under COP21 and in Paris, and then COP28, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to go through all of these, and we will share the presentation afterwards, so you can see the details here with links to all of these decisions. So what I want to kind of build this picture for you here is that we've worked in this, or we've had many kind of achievements throughout the different negotiation space, but you can see that they're somewhat fragmented, and now the negotiation space is so complex that there may be, technical folks who have no idea that actually these other areas are taking up the same kinds of concerns. And so what we are really working towards in the coming years is to create a more coherent picture and to help the UNFCCC to develop a more coherent either work program or mandated dialogue, or some kind of integrated process that would allow for all of these distinct pieces to come together and be kind of taken up in a more coordinated way. So that's a little bit of a preview of what we're working towards, but maybe just to again look back on COP30 and how am I doing on time? Maybe you can just remind me, because I forgot to look at the clock when I started, but
2 minutes.
Okay, great. So then I'll touch on a couple of highlights here. So for COP30, I just wanted to mention our joint position, which ISOCARP did endorse. And this was, we had 5 asks here. And as I mentioned already, working towards a formal UNFCCC process on multi-level action and urbanization was one ask. We also asked for better alignment of adaptation indicators, recognition of subnational roles in the just transition, localized access to climate finance, and connecting these multi-level considerations within the greater reform of the United Nations, which is happening this year, called the UN80 reforms. So all of those asks were endorsed by over 50 networks. And these are international networks of local and regional governments, associations, national-based networks of local and regional governments. So really representing such a broad global engagement. And that was really exciting to see that uptake in our position. That is a process that we engage in every year. I have not put a call to action in this presentation, but we are going to be looking for folks to come into our working groups, which contribute to that process. So that would be something just to keep an eye on, and I can provide some links afterwards on how to get connected with the constituency if this is interesting to you. So these were some of the highlights from COP30 that I won't go into them in detail because maybe I want to actually turn towards the future and tee up a little bit of what the next speaker is going to talk about as well. But we did have, just to say, we did have some direct references within the negotiated outcomes, which were quite significant. Indirect decisions that affect subnational governments, such as the establishment of a just transition mechanism, a new gender plan, and a quite ambitious action agenda restructuring. And then these two kind of committed processes on roadmaps, which I'll touch on when I turn towards the future. And maybe just also to say, we really tried this past year to showcase bottom-up leadership, where local and regional governments are really showcasing how they can contribute to global goals. And some of those strategies or initiatives were the town hall COPs, such as led by ICLEI, Finance Your City's Country Platforms, which is from FMDV, the finance network, and then subnational transition plans, which is an initiative of the Under 2 coalition. So very quickly, just looking towards
just to conclude.
Yeah. Yep, sure. Okay, then I'll skip to our upcoming priorities, because I was going to say that COP31 is a bit of an interesting new situation, because we have Turkey, who is hosting the conference, and Australia, who is going to be leading the negotiations. So I think, when we look towards COP31, 32, and 33, we are going to be continuing to focus on this integrated UNFCCC process. We'll be looking at how to actually implement multi-level NDCs, our national climate plans. We'll be looking at opportunities to input into the transition away from fossil fuels, so how countries are actually taking up that idea, this coalition of the willing, who's looking at the possibilities there as a result of COP30. Just transition implementation and the action agenda are two other areas where I think we'll have some important submissions to make, but I really wanted to just end, because I know I'm turning things over to Shireen on the IPCC special report, which is going to be, if I can say one thing, it would be really listen closely to what Shireen is going to tell us about the report, because this is a very exciting moment for local and regional governments, for really anyone who's interested in cities. When this report comes out, all eyes are going to be on us. And I just want to really take the time to say this is an exciting moment. And especially as it connects to advocacy, I think there's a lot of opportunities there, but I think also generally just for what it means for the general urban sustainability movement. So with that, I'll stop now. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We'll try to share the slides with everyone after the meeting so they can read through some of the outcomes of COP31. So our next presenter will be Shireen Alwater, really moving smoothly to the next segment. And she is from the IPCC Working Group 2 Technical Support Unit. She'll introduce herself and talk about the report. Shireen.
Thank you. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here. I hope you can hear me clearly. I'm actually joining you from Ghana at the moment because it's so interesting, Ariel, how you mentioned the adaptation, and it was announced a couple of days ago by the Singaporean government, actually, that this is the year of climate adaptation. And right now I'm in an expert meeting that is organized by Working Group 2 on methodologies, metrics, and indicators for assessing climate change impacts and adaptation. But yeah, definitely with everything going on in the world, it's really, really important, the work that we are all doing. So I'm very happy to be in this conversation today. So my name is Shane Wattar, and as said, I'm a Science Network Officer in the Working Group 2 Technical Support Unit. And this role is new. The main reason why it was created was actually because when Working Group 2 and the IPC got the mandate to develop the special report on cities, they realized a report like that cannot be done without being fully engaged with stakeholders and with cities networks and with practitioners on the ground that might not end up being authors of the report. And because of that being so important, they made a role that is specific to this. But my presentation will take you through a bit of the report and what does it hope to offer. So you might know that the IPCC's role is to assess literature that is already published, or peer-reviewed literature and gray literature, and kind of knowledges that are already available. And the authors, they assess it. So that means that they do not create knowledge out of nothing. They actually assess what is available and present the evidence that is available in the report. And for that to happen, there's a couple of principles that you can see around. They need to be, policy relevant, but not policy prescriptive. They have to, of course, be inclusive, and we have to provide a solid evidence base. And anything written in the report has to be traceable. So the key statements have to be traceable throughout the report. And there's so many other ethical considerations and principles that we have to follow in our work to keep the scientific integrity of IPCC reports. The IPC structure is made of the secretariat, the plenary, which is the representatives of the world's governments or member governments, the bureau, who are the vice chairs and the co-chairs of the working groups, and of course the IPCC chair with his also vice chairs, etc. And there are 3 working groups: Working Group 1 on physical science basis, Working Group 2 on impact, adaptation, and vulnerability, and 3 on mitigation of climate change. We also have the task force on national greenhouse gas inventories, who also function as a working group, but with a bit of a different strategy of operation. Each of the 4 working groups and TFIs are supported by technical support units, and that is where I fit in as part of the technical support unit of Working Group 2. And of course, our biggest actors are the scientists and experts and reviewers and contributing authors that are part of the report, because without them, the reports do not exist. For the 7th assessment cycle that we are part of at the moment, as you can see, it started in 2023. We're expecting it would end in 2029. We still don't know because there is a lot of discussion about the timeline at the moment. But right now we are in the process of, we're actually almost at the last half of the creation of the special report on climate change and cities, but we are in the beginning of the creation of the AR7 Working Group 2 report. So as you can see from the diagram in front of you, we have a couple of reports and publications functioning in parallel. So we're very, very busy. But we're very excited to see that the special report on climate change and cities has started earlier. And it is now, what is pending is that we will be having one last lead author meeting in August. And then afterwards, the final draft of the report will be available for government and expert review before being presented for plenary for agreement, hopefully. So we are very close to that publication. So zooming in onto the topic of interest for this webinar, the special report on cities, it has 5 chapters. These 5 chapters, you will see how relevant they are to the elements that Ariel had mentioned, and also that my other colleagues who will come in later will mention a bit on it, because the special report on cities, being a special report, when it was being scoped, the scoping process included inviting a lot of experts, but also practitioners and local community experts that might not necessarily have been engaged with IPCC processes before. And this led to a certain unique focus of the report. As you can see in chapter 4, it's called how to facilitate, the idea behind it is how to facilitate and accelerate change. Chapter 5 focuses on solutions by city types and regions, which is super relevant to what was just mentioned by Ariel. And the whole report is talking about the cities, and this has been a comment that, or maybe even a critique that sometimes surfaced after certain cycles of IPCC, that the information is not local enough, maybe not relevant to everybody. And the special report on cities is really trying to address that. And of course, having on board practitioners who actually do the work and people that represent city networks, this keeps the report grounded in reality a bit, which is something that we are really looking forward to see how it will manifest, in the form of a report. So how do we make sure that we engage with the practitioners? Because this report is for the people, it's really for the practitioners, and we want them to be able to use it and to carry it forward. From our side, what we would like to anticipate is there is a strong focus on solutions for cities. There is a full chapter on that, and the local case studies. So chapter 5, we like to call it the chapter for practitioners, chapter 1 for practitioners. And that leads me to my second bullet point of how relevant it is for the practitioners. So we included the practitioners a lot in the scoping. There's a huge number of practitioners in the author team. There's the general narrative of the report is that it has to be actionable. So when the authors are discussing things, they do want to assess, of course, the information available, and they want the report to maintain and retain its scientific integrity, but they're trying to see how to bridge between the science and the policy to be more relevant for local governments, for municipalities, for practitioners, and practitioners that are working in NGOs at the grassroots level. What would they be needing out of the report? And of course, we focus a lot on diverse knowledge sources. So it's not only limited to peer-reviewed literature, but we're looking at gray literature, potentially indigenous knowledges literature, or publications, or audio literature. So authors are also really looking at how to be inclusive, because you cannot speak of cities without acknowledging that they are totally heterogeneous. We cannot deal with them as one thing. And part of this is actually the IPC chair had just finalized an expert meeting on engaging diverse knowledge systems 3 weeks ago in the United Kingdom. And this was a very good opportunity to assess how can indigenous knowledges, local knowledge, and practitioner knowledge be better engaged in the overall IPCC process. And this has been inspired by actually the need that surfaced during the special report on cities, because we realized that you need more than one type of knowledge to send the right or the most relevant and representative information. Also, as part of my own personal work as the Science Network Officer, I organize or support our partners and stakeholders to organize what we call organized reviews. So when a draft of the report is available, they can organize a group of experts that can go through the report and leave comments so that the authors have to address them. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. So in the first order draft, for example, we had 10 organized reviews on different topics on law, finance, youth and governance, informality. And you can see from the type of themes, especially informality, it really focuses and zooms into the local context. And as we try to engage with practitioners, we have been always saying to people, you can get engaged. So experts can be involved in scoping. The scoping is over, but for the cycles, they usually start with scoping processes, but also scientists can really help the process by actually publishing papers before the cutoff dates of the IPCC report on the topics that matter to them, because the number one challenge that faces the authors of the IPCC reports typically is lack of literature. So if there are topics that you feel are not represented in the report, maybe checking if they are actually published and if there's been sufficient literature on them. If you see a gap and you can contribute to doing that research and publishing it, or getting partnerships to actually make this information available, that could be very helpful. But also, you as an expert can be involved in the review of the report, and that is why my last slide is speaking about how your last opportunity to actually review the report before the final draft that will be given to the governments will be sent out is between 8th of May and the 3rd of July of this year. So a month before the 8th of May on the IPCC website, you can submit your very simple application to be an expert reviewer for the report. And when the report is available, you just sign a confidentiality agreement and then you get access to the report. You can read part of a chapter, a whole chapter. You can read the whole report under a specific theme. You can really manage it in the best way that you see. And you could comment on the things that you feel are good, are missing a bit, and the authors are obligated to respond to your comments. I see you. I'm wrapping up. And so that is really a very important opportunity, and this also stresses on how it needs to have this engaging process to be relevant to everybody, like the local governments and municipalities. And we are hoping that the planners can use the report and the city practitioners by using the evidence that we're making available, by finding the report practical. There will be a lot of case studies in the report. And we hope to see how the process of this report will be involved into the integrated planning. But this is something that we will only discover as the report gets published and we actually see how it will, how it will be carried forward. So that is it. I thank you very much. And of course, I'm open to all questions. Please write them in the chat, and over to you, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very informative presentation. So now we're going to call upon an author who's actually part of this process to take us through some of the topics, particularly regenerative urbanism and redesigning cities for net zero cities. So I invite Emmanuel Naboni to take the floor.
Nice to meet you all, and very glad to such a context. Thanks to his colleagues. So we were asked to ground a bit the topic. That's what I will try to do. Just a small word about myself. I operate for European Union.
Emmanuel, are you able to adjust your microphone a little bit? I think it's too far.
Okay, is that better?
Yes, much better. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Matter of proximity with the PC. So I'm engaged with the European Union with different agencies of that, and let's say as with IPCC, and I'm an academic and a practitioner working in different countries and consulting for, let's say, urban design and buildings here and there. I thought that it was interesting to start from how systems are somehow degenerating due to the act of climate change. And one intriguing factor is how climate change hit sites with different intensities and in very irregular type of ways. So these are some morphing and some stochastic analysis of future scenarios. And these changes obviously can be contextualized. This is an analysis in Milan, where we can see how, depending on how we're able to mitigate, we're going to have different temperature ranges into the future. But it sounds as abstract as it can when we talk about temperature. What becomes interesting to see what are the effects, for instance, on health of climate change. We know, for instance, just to bring you a couple of important data, is that in Milan we are losing 25% of ecological system just in 50 years, as well as in terms of heat mortality and morbidity related event, there is a plus 30%. So climate change threatens the site. And perhaps I will link here a little bit to the role in IPCC, where I'm trying to work on what it means to regenerate. And if you look at definition, what we often see is that mitigation is about reduction. The KPI is basically CO2 reduction. Adaptation, it means to maintain a system, the ecological system and health despite climate change. Resilience is about recovering when it comes to short-term risk. But the terminology we are trying to introduce, when it comes from perhaps 5 or 6 years where I've studied the definition and published some books about it. It's about improving system in despite or in spite of climate change. And I will show you this perhaps about the topic with this diagram. That perhaps is also the center of communication, where we have systems, the ecological one, the system of carbon that circulates through atmosphere, grounds, matter, and the system of health. And we have a scenario where all the systems are constantly degrading. And if we mitigate, we can slow down this mitigation. If we adopt resiliency, we can bounce the effect and keep the trajectory, but yet not affecting the systems significantly. With adaptation, we conserve the status quo. So to design for adapting to climate change, it means that climate change is not affecting the system so much. But what is more interesting is, to me, regenerative design as a solution which adopts adaptation, resilience, and mitigation. But further on, it helps improving and designing systems that are ecological sound, systems that absorb CO2, and that are salutogenic, that grants health in different coordinates. So just some example. I cannot release much, but this collaboration because of NDA. But working with Atkins on the Moraba area in Riyadh, we talk about the first topic, thriving ecology. There is a very interesting system of wadis, which are like dry river in Arabic. And there is a set of simulation, not shareable yet, where these are where I was able to thermodynamically, biologically, and let's say carbon-wise and health-wise model them. And I will just present some side aspect related to that, but that interfere with climate change. With climate change, we are shrinking the time in which other species are in comfort. And by design, by urban planning, we can extend throughout the year the time where butterflies, reptiles, other species can be in place. And this is a study, for instance, studying how biodiversity works into context. I hope we have more time. But this system then has in turn a big effort when it comes to ecology or when it comes to carbon. Just ideally, and to mention, a correct ecological system can reduce the carbon just for building of by half on a very giant type of scale. The second matter is carbon, and I developed a system that allows city to track carbon in all systems within the coordinates of climate change, and just look at the number for different contexts where I had the chance to work, for instance, with SOM back in the old days for Burj Khalifa area. We can have an impact over 50 years for square meter of 30 tons of CO2. And I will just scroll through projects where I was involved, New York Times and surrounding Manhattan area, 1 kilometer, we reduced by a third. And I follow up. Torino, San Francisco, peripheral downtown, Lausanne, the PFL campus optimization, Milano suburb, Gothenburg, Faroe Island, and Rome, last project. We were shifting from 30,000 as an impact to 90. And what are the matters that are being designed in that case? So for each site, is it possible to control nowadays all the factors? And I will just go to this picture, which tell us how these elements like building operation, mobility, we can see that construction, waste, all the system has a carbon impact, which is largely affected by climate change. And what we can see here, I forgot to insert the slide, is how they shift as an effect of climate change and how design should be targeted to manage this complexity. So that was the second target. And third target is climate change. Some studies I did for Venice, where we can see how in 2050, whether we have canal, breezes, courtyards, or even vegetation in some part, we will have a flattened picture where the perceived comfort is actually unbearable. And this situation applies to many cities, and the topic of health should be treated as in a new way as an act of climate change. So how do we provide more comfort for people and health for people? So this example in Rome, where there is very ample air conditioning provided by the site. So these lakes and this vegetation is actually the conditioning of the site. And then there is several studies we can talk in other contexts. But through this means it's possible to create a heterogeneous condition where people are in comfort and where the building themselves are activator of these breezes throughout the site. An important concept that climate change is adaptation to climate change of people. And what we have noticed, just to wrap up, almost is that people have a different reaction. Each subject has a different reaction to that, and urban planning can account by providing diversity in design and diverse condition. And that was more or less the topic of that project. So climate change requires not codified approaches oftentimes. And it requires to not treat how we are doing nowadays, treating the urban context where we have an ecological department, a carbon department, an health department, and some that manage climate. What we need is a system that is interrelated, and that has an outcome, for instance, in the palette of tools that they use. We are used to silo-side type of approaches where tools are in a very shy way connecting. But I'm showing now here the palette I use in urban design, where the ecological system has a link to the health system into the city, and where all the data from that are affected by climate, and it's all a circular process to be designed where data has to cross and be crossing boundary toward other type of subject. So having a regenerative type of approach as opposed to what we can call an adaptive and resilient type of approach has big benefits. In terms of climate management, obviously, we are improving climate. We are not just managing that. When we talk about ecology, we can make it thrive rather than conserve it. Or when it comes to the decarbonization, we can have a big sequestration of carbon from the atmosphere rather than have a mitigation approach. We just try to reduce, in a way, the emission of carbon. And obviously, a big topic is the economy of climate change. And the regenerative approach, as compared to an adaptive one, seems to have a net present value also for investors, which is quite convenient. Just some suggestions. So this book I was able to publish 5 years ago is for free online. Regenerative Design and Digital Practice. More recently, Adapting to Urban Heat with Elsevier and also with Professor Mats Antamouris involved. And obviously, we're looking forward to this publication where some of the terminology may be affected. And terminology seems to be mattering, as I tried to show in this presentation. For those who want to stay in contact, here are some references. And thank you very much, Lisa, for the moderation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I mean, it's very interesting how we are moving from this global policy spaces and really going to the very specific elements. And to move us on our next section, where I'm going to invite Siddharth Nagdani, and he's going to present on one of the most pressing climate change impacts, which is urban heat. He's going to talk about, just give us some lessons from the World Bank Handbook for Urban Heat Management. So Siddharth, over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Lisa. And hi, everyone. Let me just pull up my slides. There we go. All right. So, hello. My name is Siddharth Nadkarni. I'm an architect and urban planner by background. And I've been working on urban development with multilateral development banks and with local and regional governments in the Global South for more than 10 years. I'm an associate director for urban development at Atkins Realis, and I was the team leader for this World Bank assessment, the World Bank assignment to develop a handbook for urban heat management in the Global South. We did this in partnership with the Red Cross, Red Crescent Climate Center. The seed of the idea for the handbook really emerges from the World Bank's engagement with cities in South Asia, in Southeast Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa as part of their programs on combating extreme heat. What they were finding was that city governments were often acutely aware of what impacts extreme heat has, but they couldn't feel like they could act very effectively to combat extreme heat for three reasons. There were, of course, capacity constraints, resource, technical, financial capacity constraints. The topic itself felt a bit overwhelming or intimidating to take action on, just because of the scale at which you have to intervene and the complexity of how action has to be taken. And then finally, a lot of cities mentioned not having suitable guidance for taking action. There was a lot of literature, a lot of very good literature out there on extreme heat, but not often tailored to the specific context of a global South city. So this is essentially the gap that the handbook tries to address. So in Atkins Realis's advisory work with MDBs and cities around the world, we often address similar challenges. Here's an example from a World Bank project we did a couple of years ago to help the city of Rajshahi in Bangladesh to identify and prioritize adaptation investments. The work involved developing a heat hazard model, which was supposed to be the basis for identifying and prioritizing those investments. Now, as with many other contexts, data availability is a key challenge. Now, when you're preparing a model, you get a range of issues with the lack of data. The most obvious one is, of course, you don't know how reliable or confident your analysis can be in the absence of data. But sometimes there's a tendency to overcorrect and try to kind of generate primary data or to fill gaps to maybe a degree where the model doesn't have any or has very limited marginal benefit. So the team for this assignment took an approach of not letting perfect be the enemy of the good, and relied on a range of data sources at the global level, at the national level, kind of complemented it with qualitative data to prepare the model. What that did for the city was it kind of gave them the space and room to focus more on the prioritization and case making for these adaptation investments, instead of spending time trying to kind of gather data to kind of populate the model. Another example is these action plans that we've been developing for cities along with our MDB clients. There's a couple of screenshots from Green City action plans for Alexandria and Bursa that we've developed for the EBRD. On the lower side of the screen is an urban economic plan we developed for Lamu in Kenya as part of an FCDO program. So these action plans basically look at what the current situation in the city is, identify what the challenges are, come up with some recommended actions. And what we do is we take those actions one step ahead and we prepare these implementation roadmaps called action cards. So it kind of breaks the whole process of implementation into these manageable steps for the city. So that kind of helps address this concern around complexity. It gives this end-to-end view of what it would take to implement an action, which helps with planning, especially multi-year budget cycles and so on. So a lot of the lessons from our previous work in the Global South informed our approach to developing this handbook. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel. Like I had said before, there's a lot of good literature out there. So for us, it just meant we had to translate that into guidance by leveraging not only the expertise and experience within our team, but also that's the expertise available within the World Bank and its partners. And then a key component of the approach was to almost test the guidance with potential users. We did this through what were called road testing sessions. These sessions we covered five cities in the regions that the handbook was targeting. We covered a range of potential users, city planners, disaster risk management experts, practitioners, city networks. And so there's input in the handbook from more than 150 people over the course of the project. So that's what the handbook looks like. It contains all of the inputs that from all the people that I was kind of summarizing on the previous slide. It serves as a guidance manual for cities to take action on all aspects of heat management in a city. So you're looking to build long-term resilience as well as kind of respond to a heat wave. The guidance is written almost like expert advice. We wanted this to be in the style that you're having maybe a conversation with somebody from across a table, explaining to them how to carry out a particular activity. We've structured it and we've kind of put in a lot of wayfinding measures to make sure the handbook can be like a reference guide. So you can thumb through various sections, find exactly the activity you need guidance on, and jump right to it. Within the handbook, the guidance is structured under 3 volumes. So on the right side, you can see what the 3 volumes are. And broadly, the 3 volumes are covering the why, the how, and the what for building heat resilience. I'll just go into a little more detail on the technical manual that forms the core of the handbook. So in line with the idea of having just-in-time guidance, we've kind of structured the technical manual under 4 sections. The guidance is aimed at what we were calling the doers within city government. So mid and senior level technical staff who are given the responsibility for implementing policy changes or infrastructure interventions in cities. For each section, the guidance is tailored to the purpose of the section. So for things that are a little more sequential, so like for assessing heat risk or for planning for heat resilience, the guidance is very much step by step with some considerations or case studies complementing the guidance to help cities adapt the steps to their own context. Whereas for other sections, like the responding to heat wave section, this guidance was structured like a checklist because we thought one of the use cases for someone to look at the guidance in this section would be maybe they know there's an imminent heat wave, and a checklist would help them kind of prioritize where they need to focus their attention, take stock of how preparations are going, and so on. And then within the technical manual for each activity, of course, there's quite a bit of guidance to help adapt all the methodologies and approaches to the city specific context. One of the things that emerged from consultations was that cities also needed support or guidance on things that were maybe not directly related to heat management. So at specific junctures where it serves that particular activity, we've given guidance on more general approaches or methodologies that can support that activity. So how to identify stakeholders for a workshop or what are the different approaches you can take to prioritize actions for implementation and so on. The other thing that came out of the road testing sessions and something we were trying to track with each session was to try and understand what are some core lessons that are resonating with some of our potential users. So those lessons were distilled into 5 principles for taking action on extreme heat, and those basically are infused throughout the handbook in all the guidance. And then for each principle, it just so happened that we found like at least one great case study that illustrates the point. So there's one really, this is one of my favorite case studies in the handbook with the city of Nepalganj on the southern border of Nepal, which faces a lot of the capacity constraints that a lot of cities of that size in this region face, but wanted to take some action to combat extreme heat. And it really started with a workshop to essentially mark up what are the hotspots in the city for the participants in the workshop. Excuse me. And that workshop happened to have some partners who are interested in supporting the city take the work ahead. And eventually it snowballed into a heat action plan, and a lot of the actions in the plan were eventually implemented. And Nepalganj is now a bit of a model for other cities in Nepal to take action on heat. The other key lesson that seemed to resonate, for which this case study from Medellin is a great example, is to not treat heat action as a standalone kind of isolated thing, but to try and integrate with other initiatives. There's this excellent example from the Corredores Verdes project, which is fundamentally to connect deprived neighborhoods to employment and social amenities. But the decision to make it a green corridor is what leads to all these other co-benefits, including combating extreme heat. This is my last slide. So these are the other three principles that are underpinning the guidance in the handbook. This is something that's in the start of the handbook, but I thought it's probably a good place to end for today. The only thing left for me to do is to show you the QR code where you can download the handbook, and I can also drop a link in the chat box. And yeah, look forward to questions, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It's very much interesting how you're providing these specific steps, specific guidance to, to technicians, to different people who are working on the ground and addressing these challenges in cities. So to really go deeper and really understand what's happening on the ground, I'm going to invite our last speaker. Celia is going to talk about a toolkit, prioritizing climate action and local planning in the UK. She's going to talk about the toolkit and how planners are really doing it on the ground. So Celia Davis, I invite you to do your presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Lisa. And yes, I think we'll round off the series of presentations looking specifically at the UK context, which is yeah, an interesting example, I think, of kind of mixed success in relation to how the planning system is responding to the climate crisis. Just a quick note on who we are. I work for the Town and Country Planning Association, which was established over 100 years ago and established the first two garden cities, Welwyn and Letchworth, in the UK. And we are a charity, and we continue to promote the principles of healthy, resilient, sustainable placemaking. And we do that by working a lot in collaboration with local governments, with campaigning for policy change at the national level, and working in collaboration with other partners. Just a bit of context in terms of the UK, we're coming out of the wettest winter recorded. There's been a series of really quite catastrophic flood events, and what we're seeing is some communities in the UK are exposed to repeated flooding. And what's been quite interesting is that there's been some quite high profile coverage in the media about new developments that have been built and are being subject to flooding, indicating that we're not building new homes always in the most resilient places, and we're not building them to standards that are capable of withstanding the climate that we are now living with. Just to place the guidance that I want to talk about in context, we have a fairly complex and fairly unique, I think, planning system in the UK, because it's based on discretionary decision making. So although it's plan-led, we don't have a zonal system in the UK which has that kind of detailed requirements that set out really clearly what kind of development is to be expected. So what happens is we have plans which indicate allocations for different types of development, and then planning applications are made, and local government has a really key role to play, because they both write the plans and make the decisions about whether planning proposals are acceptable. So in relation to the climate crisis, local government is really important, and the local plan is a really key delivery tool for climate objectives, because it sets policies and requirements for new development, the sorts of standards that we want development to see. So local plans are directed by both legislation and policy at the national level, and there's quite clear legal requirements on local plan makers to align with the Climate Act, which is where we have our carbon budget set, and also adaptation response to climate change. However, these are quite high level. They're not particularly directive in terms of what we want to see. So we can have high level carbon budgets, but there's not a very clear relationship at the local level to the national scale carbon budgets. However, what we do know is that most of the highest emitting sectors in the UK, planning has a role to play in regulating them in relation to surface transport, construction. The built environment in the UK accounts for about 42% of our emissions, and it's an area that some of those areas have been quite stubborn and quite difficult. We haven't seen the types of clear reductions like we have in, for example, the energy sector. So there's a real challenge there that we want to respond to, or help planners respond to, hence the climate guide. So this is a document that is produced in partnership with ourselves, the TCPA, and the Royal Town Planning Institute. And it's really the main audience for this guidance is local authorities, it's local government. And what we want to do is to really encourage and inspire local government to take serious action through the levers available to them in the planning system. Again, speaking a little bit to the complexity of planning in the UK, we have devolved nations which have their own responsibility for planning. So we have introductory resources that try and outline the key requirements that are set in the different countries. And I'd say that, for example, in Wales and Scotland, they're a bit further ahead than in England and Northern Ireland in relation to how progressive they are and how much they prioritise climate action through the planning system. We then have a suite of mitigation topic resources, and this is really looking at much more detailed advice and guidance about the sorts of policies that we would expect or encourage local authorities to put in their local plans. So they address issues like standards for new buildings and how you might drive further than the kind of national regulations for buildings to create higher levels of energy efficiency, renewable energy, this kind of thing. We are looking also at sustainable transport and the principles for design and placemaking. And we haven't done this before. This is quite a new guide looking at the circular economy because there's so much construction waste, and we'll also have more focus on embodied carbon and retrofit, how the planning system can support the sustainability of the existing building stock as well as new development. In terms of climate adaptation, our resources are really trying to respond to the specific risks that are very common across the UK, but it's not comprehensive. Some areas of the UK, for example, have a specific issues relating to wildfires. We haven't covered that here, but it's something that we might add to the suite in the future. But we have topics, resources looking at flood risk, which is universally across the UK a concern because there's so many different sources of flood risk, from rivers, the sea, surface water becoming a really increasing risk source. We've looked at designing places for climate resilience. So that's looking at more a site-specific scale, what kind of design approaches you can make to ensure that that place is resilient to future overheating, future flood risk, and other climate vulnerabilities. So I just will briefly run through some of the key messages that come from our guidance. One is that we're really encouraging local authorities to take a carbon literate approach. This isn't something that the national government in the UK asks planners to do, but we see this as a real key to ensuring your legal requirement to align with the carbon budget can be achieved. It's difficult to know if you align with the carbon budget if you don't know the carbon impact of your spatial plan, where the locations for growth and the design requirements that you're putting on that. And we think that starting with a carbon literate and carbon assessment really drives the sorts of mitigation policies in local planning that we'd like to see. We have specifically put, for reasons I won't go into, there's been lots of complexity around issues for net zero buildings and whether local authorities are able to set parameters that go beyond national government's policies or not. So we've kind of really majored on setting out some clear advice about the circumstances where we think local authorities can do that. And as I mentioned, we've got new content on retrofit, circular economy and embodied carbon. In terms of adaptation, I think the prime key message is similar to mitigation. It's about starting with the evidence. What we're really encouraging local authorities to do is understand climate vulnerabilities in their specific communities, whether they're a coastal authority and have issues with erosion and tidal flood risk, whether they're in a catchment where we need more strategic natural flood management, which captures and stores water away from towns, for example. We really need that kind of evidence-led approach so that the planners can respond to that and put and indicate spatial responses at the appropriate scale. So moving away from the climate guide, I did just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about what's happening in the UK in terms of planning reform. We have probably, since I've been a planner, there has been constant change in the national policy. So planners are always responding to new policies, to change. And of course, this is about very much responding to the current government's priorities, which at the moment is very much economic growth level driven. They have a sort of really ambitious housing target, and you can see through the proposed reform to the National Planning Policy Framework, which is our kind of national overarching national policy document for planning, that's really majored. And I suppose our concern, and this is very much a TCPA position here, is that climate change is perhaps losing out in response to that there's not enough weight given to the climate crisis, and the national policy as proposed does not really represent the kind of transformation and the proportion of change that we need to see. We think that there are some areas where there's been progress, but more limitations on kind of local applications for fossil fuel exploration, for example, some really positive things on sustainable transport planning. But there's been also regression on some areas. So it seems that it's the policy changes will make it easier for developers to build in areas where surface water flood risk is a particular issue, and some of those issues around building standards being quite limiting in terms of what local authorities are able to do. And I think, just to summarise, I'd say that there's a challenge here because our guidance is really about what local authorities can do and what local government to do. But we have this direction of travel at the national scale, which is really about centralising power to the national policies and limiting that space for action, which is a bit frustrating. I have a table here which is far too small for anyone to see, but we've kind of assessed the climate guidance policy areas against what we see the direction of travel is in national policy. And you can see that there are some areas where we're concerned that there is regression rather than progression that we'd like to see. So in summary, climate action, where we've seen progress, it's very much been driven at the local level, but that's kind of contradicted by this direction of travel towards national policy and centralisation. What it's also meant is that we've seen really varied progress, so that there's some local areas that are really have brilliant progress, net zero building policies, really tight and clear expectations around adaptation, overheating, water scarcity, and some areas that are kind of lagging behind. So we think that more weight and direction, but also that flexibility and space to respond to the climate crisis is what's needed. So again, here's a QR code if you'd like to look at the resources in more detail. And that was a very rapid flash through, but I hope it was of interest.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's very, very interesting. I mean, we're just going to move into the Q&A section to really have a discussion. I'll start with you, Celia, since you're still in the vibe. My question would be, you were talking about, the disconnect between the national plans and the local plans, and how multi-level governance is still something that's very difficult to work with. In your view, what do you think should be done, particularly around financing climate action at the local level? Because I've seen in my experience, in some developing countries, that we see a lot of public-private partnerships. We see international organizations or the World Bank coming in to cover that gap. How is it in the UK?
Yeah, that's a really brilliant question, Lisa. I'll talk about flood risk because I think it is an issue that really captures that. So essentially what's happened historically is that there's a set budget that's set by national government, and local authorities will put in bids to a chunk or a share of that money for their specific projects that they want to see. We've had a change in policy which has actually moved away recently from reliance on private investment, because what local authorities have been seeing, particularly in some of the more deprived, economically deprived parts of the country, is they find it really hard to lever that private investment, and it's kind of fair enough, private companies are saying, why should we pay in for the flood defences? That should be what our taxes go towards, to simplify it. So we're moving away from that reliance on private investment and more towards national funding. I think what's happening is, although there's been a step change in the amount of money, we are nowhere near what we're going to be needing in 10, 20, 30 years' time in terms of the level of funding that we can expect to be seeing to keep places safe. Parts of the east coast of England, flood defences may be towards the end of their lifetime by as soon as 2040, and we could be looking at billions of pounds to really defend and keep communities on the east coast of England safe. So yeah, we have a long way to go, I think.
Absolutely. I think the context in which local governance works is a complex space. So I have a question for Ariel. There's a question in the chat box which says, is there enough credibility in UN initiatives to really invest in the future of COPs? I know you responded, but you can maybe briefly come in and respond. And also, maybe what's one thing that planners should be paying attention to this year?
Yeah, great. I think actually my answer for that would be this very linked to Martina's question. So yeah, I mean, I think this is obviously a hard question. I think, certainly the COP process is something where I think everyone involved with it knows that it needs to be reformed, but we also know this is the best process that we have. So it's sort of something where everyone who works in the space, I think, sits with that. But in terms of concrete opportunities for this year, as I said, the UN 80 reforms are, happening this year. They could bring something better. We just don't know. Obviously, this is a very fraught time for the entire UN system and multilateralism in general. So, the hope is that the UN can respond to kind of that environment and really bring substantive reforms into play. So that's one thing. As I said in my response in the chat, this kind of acknowledgement even by the COP30 president that we now may have sort of different speeds, is what they've called it, of these multilateral processes, that we just have to accept that and find ways to kind of allow those speeds to go at the speed that they go at. And so if there are sort of faster speeds than the consensus base models, which we had kind of put so much credibility and trust, or had built so much credibility and had built trust into, if those aren't as strong as they used to be, then kind of finding these other ways to mobilize. Coalitions of the willing is the kind of phrase that people are I think attaching themselves to, and the roadmaps could be a way to to mobilize those coalitions. And so I think for me, looking at what that process is like, looking at this the conference that's going to happen in Santa Marta in Colombia, which is a process that is not a part of the UNFCCC, but is also not disconnected. So it's a little complicated, but the organizers of it are actually recognized by the action agenda within the UNFCCC. So and those outcomes can actually feed into the global stocktake then. So just to say, I would say the one thing, if we see traction in these not alternative, but related pathways, I think that could be really exciting and could show new promise for ways that the world collaborates together. So that would be the one thing I would be paying attention to besides the special report, of course.
Thank you so much. I mean, absolutely, with the changing financial priorities and the global landscape of climate and finance, I think there are many things that we, as planners, we're being confronted with. I will invite Shireen. I have a question for you, very specific to the report. My question is, but before I ask my question, I encourage everyone in the meeting to post their questions in the chat so that I'm not the only one with questions. So in terms of the different city types that you talked about, the different case studies that you're going to be presenting, can you just tell us maybe a little bit of the different city types? How are you defining the city? How are you differentiating regional planning and city planning within the report?
So thank you for the question. And just for the record, it's not really me, it's the authors that are doing all of this. Us as TSU are just supporting. Unfortunately, even though I cannot really shares this information because we are still at that confidential stage where the discussions among the authors, and since the report has not yet been presented to plenary and agreed, I cannot really speak about that, but I can give a bit of a sense on the knowledge production process among the author teams to reach this, because there is a lot of interest in this topic and it has been getting a lot of attention. There's a lot of cross-chapter discussions taking place for them to make sure that all of these terms are consistent. And I do understand also that since the IPCC reports are at the root assessing what is available, there was a lot of effort that the author team has been doing with a case study gallery that should be connected to the special report on cities, and which is of absolute interest to practitioners. And the process to collect these case study gallery was actually a bit, of a challenge, because sometimes you want to include as an author, you would want to include a case study, but there is not enough publications on it. Okay, or information on it, and you cannot bring the information from your own personal experience, even if you have lived it. And that is where you really get humbled by the fact that the system is in place for a reason, of course, to have a streamline, transparency, everything, of course, is well, discussed and presented. But the discussion comes in, okay, then, so what can we do with what is already available? And that is why we really need to remember that the science, or an organization like the IPCC, it's at the mercy of the work of the scientists and what gets published. So I'm sorry that I couldn't delve deep into the technicalities of what are city types and everything. I look forward also to how it will be perceived, or presented at the end, sorry. But if the attendees are extra curious, I again invite you to submit your applications to be reviewers to the report, where you will get the access to the report and be able to assess it and maybe write comments. If something doesn't work, this will be your last chance to say, I see a city type that is not there. I need you to consider this, because once it's published, hopefully it's published. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That's motivation for me to apply, so because I'm very curious. Okay, so Emmanuel, maybe you can also jump in. There's a question for you in the chat, which asks if the IPCC report endorses the approach of regeneration. And maybe you can further talk about, what has been the uptake like of these emerging concepts beyond the IPCC? There's interesting concepts that professionals or technical experts are coming up. Do you see a lot of pushback or a lot of that lack of enthusiasm from policymakers? Emmanuel?
Sorry, the microphone was off.
Okay.
Yes, as already said by Shireen, it's an ongoing process where there is different forces and voices, and for my experience as a contributing author, it's very democratic process. And so I took the initiative to let's say, discuss and introduce the topic of urban regeneration that wasn't yet, say, terminologically speaking, introduced in previous debates. As analysis that we have done with data and confronting terminology with data, what we could have seen, and I try to present that in a glimpse. It is possible to cope with climate change with achieving or pursuing in intent net positive outcomes. So given the baseline of mitigation, adaptation, and resilient behavior, it's probably possible to take the topic and the forces of climate change as an opportunity to having more thriving ecology, having pursuing decarbonization rather than limit carbon, and as well being salutogenic, so creating cities that are revitalized but also offer health. Within this context reflects not only what I'm trying to voice, but what comes from different fields, starting from ecology and then throughout many disciplines, and in the latest years in urban planning and regenerative design, which is the fact that a sustainable approach it's often associated with the terminology about reducing impact on ecological system, about reducing emission, reducing harmful situation for human. And this type of terminology, it's becoming too conservative, especially when we think that our system are strongly degenerated. So in order to achieve restoration of these values and regeneration, that's the idea. And it is preliminary, there is a section about it, but obviously it goes through another round of review, and it's a long process. And probably the second part of your question was about policy or integration or of this type of terminology, and it is already happening in certain context. I partly teach at the Royal Danish Academy in Copenhagen, and we are operating in the Danish context where this is already a fact, that every type of urban action will have to have a biodiversity net positive output, whereas that intervention should be sequestering carbon rather than emitting, and so on and so forth. So I think it depends from it's very geographical different, but it can be an interesting paradigm.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. There is a question for you in the chat. Maybe you can type and respond. because I'm going to ask the last question to Siddharth. And the question from Andrew Coleman, he says, what can global North cities learn from global South cities to build resilience in overheating? And maybe you can also talk about what do you see as the role of local communities in your experience through the different cases that you were working on in the handbook? How are local communities engaged in the processes beyond just receiving these different solutions?
Yeah, I think maybe let me start with the second one first because I feel like it might give a bit more background to what I thought I should say for the first one. So I think in all of these cases that we've kind of included in the handbook, for the large part, we've found a lot of situations where non-governmental actors are taking the lead on action. Um, in a couple of cases, the city government's role has been to kind of catalyze some of that action. Sometimes it's been as simple as getting out of the way. But I think there's been some very positive and very constructive kind of ways um, in which civil society organizations, the private sector has been involved in kind of combating extreme heat. And to the first one, I think that along very similar lines, I feel like the one thing, and I say this as having lived in a global north city for 15 years now. The one difference there seems to be is one of mindset, where maybe there is a tendency to try and create some kind of a positive change in the built environment, which means often you are trying out pilots. Sometimes you're taking action at a small scale and kind of exploring how that goes and see if it's worth scaling up. Um, so I think, yeah, just to kind of open and be a bit more innovative and kind of opportunistic about trying to kind of create a positive change in the built environment, I would say is the big lesson for the global north.
Thank you so much. Very interesting. I mean, in just closing up the webinar, this has been very, very, very fruitful because we don't just come out of this conversation with ideas, but we come up with practical toolkits, with a handbook, with different resources that we can go and actually use in our different work. So I'm going to call upon Beatrice to come and to give some final remarks and close the webinar. Beatrice.
Thank you very much. And let me just start by thanking all our speakers. It's been a truly inspiring conversation, and I will echo what Lisa was saying. It's the different scales and ideas, but it's also the practical tools and solutions that you've shared with us. And I do hope that everybody has come away with something to inspire them to action. And I believe we're going to share the recording very soon, and also it'd be great if the speakers could share their presentations and had links to resources so we can have this as a permanent resource. Yes, thank you again for attending. And I just wanted to say we're going to carry on this series, and please check the RTPI and ISOCARP website and social media channels for updates on the next event. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye.